Councillor in the South, and he's a co-founder of the Hibernia Forum, which is a classical liberal think tank. Claims he can argue with a stone in an empty room, so we'll allow him to do so. Come on up, please.
Thanks very much, Emer. Thank you, everybody. It's really nice to be here, especially representing the Hibernia Forum from down south. I think anywhere libertarians can gather in a venue larger than a phone box is a celebratory day, but to be in a place like this is absolutely fantastic, and I really welcome the opportunity to speak to you. In a way, this is a topic that's kind of like preaching to the converted, so without getting kind of too boring about things where we're all nodding together, I decided to just kind of mix it up a little and start throwing in a bit of morality and a few other bits and bobs that presumably will have Dermot or Claire shouting communist at me by the end. So, first of all, I've come with some great news, really good news. The war on drugs is over, and the prohibitionists lost. The reason they lost is that, remarkably enough, as you might have noticed or might have heard, people are still doing drugs. And you kind of wonder then, why do people still do drugs? Anthropologists, sociologists, behavioural economists, they will all have examined why people do drugs. And does anybody have any idea why people do drugs?
They like it.
Because it's fun. Because they like it. It brings pleasure. Now, how do you outlaw pleasure and expect to win? That's not going to work. So, the rational person in the room who wants pleasure and sees a pill or a cigarette or some powder as the avenue to that pleasure, the person who does that is acting completely rationally from their point of view. They want pleasure. But the person who sees the downsides of that, potentially addiction, ostracization, economic ruin, death, and they decide not to take drugs, they're also acting rationally. So rationality doesn't really have anything to do with whether we take drugs or not. It really just depends on whether we want pleasure or whether we gain pleasure from our chastity. So the thing is, the war on drugs is over, but you might have noticed that people are still plugging away at it. So does anybody know who Hiro Onoda was? This is for the A-star award. Hiro Onoda. Hiro Onoda was the last Japanese soldier who fought World War II until 1974 in Indonesia on his own. And he didn't know the war was over. So there's an awful lot of people who don't know the war is over. And politicians will continue to tell you that the war on drugs is valid and vital. Theresa May said it last week. She said, we're going to redouble our efforts in the war on drugs. So redoubling means that presumably there'll be fewer people doing drugs? I don't think so. So there are people out there who really think, politicians really think this is a kind of the most basic virtue to signal to voters. We care. And the way we show we care is that we try to stop people doing drugs because drugs are terrible things. Now, I am a politician. So that's where I get a little bit into a quandary. Because if I'm in a room with people and I'm trying to talk about drugs, 9 politicians are saying, I'm going to save you from drugs. And I'm the guy saying, save yourself. Act rationally. If you don't want to take drugs because you're afraid of them, you're afraid of what they might do, don't do it. If you want to take drugs because they bring pleasure to you, they don't harm anybody else, do it. That's the bit where people start throwing stuff at me. So, you have to say, why haven't they gone away? When they realised after 40 years of the drug war, Nixon brought it in the 1970s in response to the hippie culture of the 60s and 70s, which he hated. So he decided to bring in this drug war. We're all kind of thinking drugs have always been illegal. In the States, all drugs were basically legal before 1913. Across Europe, a lot of drugs are not in a wink illegal. So why did the war on drugs, why does it keep going? Why do these people not give up when they see that it hasn't worked? And it's because it comes from a sense of self-righteousness. It comes from a sense of religious fervour. And those things don't respond to logic. It doesn't matter how often you beat somebody. If they believe that they will win, they'll just keep coming back. They used to use clerics for moral authority. So we had Father Matthew, famously in the South, who led the temperance movement. And the temperance movement across the world was led primarily by religious figures, in the West anyway, Christian religious figures. So the moral authority for this authoritarianism, where you were forcing individuals to do your bidding rather than their own, with their own bodies, came from the clerics. The clerics have had a bad 50 years. Their reputation isn't great. Their moral authority is kind of on the floor. So what do prohibitionists do now? Well, they need a moral authority. So instead of using the clerics, they're now using the medics. So the medics are coming on the TV. The medics are telling you they're taking all the drugs, we'll do all the bad things, and you can't do it because I'm really, really clever, and I'm a doctor, and I'm telling you what you don't know, you're a bit stupid, and so you got to do what I say. And I'm saying to the politicians, you got to make laws against this because I know, because I have moral authority, because I'm a doctor. Well, that's a slippery slope, as we know, because you might want to ban cocaine or heroin today, but tomorrow, as in literally probably tomorrow, we're going to probably have about sugar and fat and not running. And, you know, once you give any group, selected group, moral authority over you, they tend not to stop at the logical, and they will just keep going and keep going. That's what happened to the clerics, and ultimately I think it's what's going to happen to the medics. We all in this room understand the logical arguments against prohibition, okay? It's an impediment to personal freedom, it's an imposition by the state, and it's coercion and all that stuff, okay? But as I said at the start, actually abolishing prohibition is going to require more than just the logical arguments that we all understand. It's going to involve winning the morality argument. And this is the point where people say morality is subjective, and it's, you know, it shouldn't impinge on individuals and all the rest, and that's all fine, and this is where Dermot and Claire start shouting at me. But this is why I'm having conversations today. Maybe we'll just kind of mix it up a bit. We'll see where we can end up in the room. So the good news is that we can actually win the moral argument. And as libertarians, we don't win a lot of arguments. So this is a really good day. To explain where I come from on this, lots of different factions in a room, such a small number of ideological people, but I'd be what I like to call a directional libertarian. As a politician, I can't be a purist on this. I want policies that are in the direction of libertarians. There's not going to be a utopia for me. There are destinational libertarians, absolute purists who won't have anything but anarchy, and that's fine. I admire their optimism. I have a lot of sympathy for their optimism. But I just don't see anarchy being the order of the day anytime soon. So as a directional libertarian, I'm looking at practical ways that I can reduce the harm of prohibition. And we have the evidence. As I say, we can win the arguments. We only have to look at recent successes like Portugal. The Netherlands have been a success for a while. Multiple US states are dropping prohibition on cannabis. And so the time is kind of good for us. And we can, if we're sensible about how we package this, we can really put the prohibitionists to bed, probably only for another generation, because they will come back. As I say, they never die, they never lose, they always seem to want to come back. But we have an opportunity now to sell the advantages of dropping prohibition. And the advantages are fewer shoplifters, fewer muggings, fewer burglaries, fewer murders, fewer prisoners, fewer prisons. Pretty good things to sell. If you can say to people, we're going to have fewer people breaking into your house, fewer people mugging you on the street, you're going to have to pay fewer taxes to fund all this, courts won't be occupied, policemen won't be occupied. You know, these are things that we can sell. And we can also show the harm that prohibition has caused, and this is where the moral argument comes in. There's less chance for particularly poor people of growing up and entering crime. There's more chance of escaping poverty if you aren't stigmatized or criminalized. There are fewer deaths from taking drugs if they're legal, because the quality is more assured. There are fewer toxins in it. Prohibition in the United States proved this. So during Prohibition, more people died of consuming alcohol than after Prohibition. And the reason was because you had every half-baked, literally, chemist making up their own batch. Concentrations went up and down. You couldn't predict how many pints of this week was going to put you in the same position it was last week. Methanol crept into the system, other toxins. And so people died as a result of prohibition. People are dying now as a result of drug prohibition for exactly the same reasons. People don't know what's been mixed in with the drugs. You know, we have drug entrepreneurs who want to maximize profitability. They do that dishonorably by mixing it with other things. They don't really care about you, they only care about the money you give them, and that's fine. That's entrepreneurial spirit, I suppose. But at the end of the day, it means that prohibition is endangering people who take drugs. If prohibition was lifted, you would know that the quality of the drug was this, you know it wasn't mixed in with that. Also, the strength of drugs, the illegal drugs, has to increase when prohibition is enforced. I mean, that's down to smuggling. It's very easy to kind of catch somebody who's bringing in 2 tons of whatever you want yourself. So what they have to do is try to maximise the strength of that. They often do it artificially. So instead of ordinary cannabis that people in the 70s, 80s would be familiar with, now have skunk, we've now got synthetic forms, additives, to try to make it more potent, and only because it's to do with the bulk of the smuggled good. Crack was another example where it was deliberately invented by creative scientists to increase profitability because of the difficulty of smuggling in large amounts of cocaine. So the deaths increase because of the increase in concentrations, the increase in toxins. So the moral argument there is prohibition is actually causing deaths. The other thing to bear in mind is that during prohibition in the US, alcohol was drunk. It was unregulated quality, as I say, unregulated frequency as well. Closing times and other things like that meant that it caused more harm in not only the individual but also in communities and families. It was also obviously being sold in a criminal environment. So you were deliberately making criminals of people who were simply just having a drink, and today smoking a joint, doing some coke, whatever it is. You're also feeding a gang culture that creates far more violence in inner cities than in privileged areas. So it also created, obviously, Al Capone and all those gang kind of enriched them and empowered them, made them heroes in their local community. Why on earth would we want to do that if we can simply remove their power to do that and remove their money by removing prohibition? And it ended because of 4% beer. 4% beer was mandated across the US, and because it was mandated, everybody knew what they were going to get. They were going to get 4% beer. They knew how many pints they could drink. They knew there weren't going to be any toxins in it. And so people did the logical and rational thing. They chose the beer because they wanted beer, but they didn't choose the hooch, which varied in concentration, which varied in toxins, made them sick. And so dropping prohibition saved lives and saved families and communities. So the notion that families and communities and individuals are harmed by legalising alcohol or legalising more drugs is a fallacy on its face. The criminals went out of business. And again, that's a potent moral argument to sell. The war on drugs also does more harm than good. And this is the strongest moral argument. It does harm to the individual, for the reasons that I've mentioned. It also criminalises, stigmatises, marginalises, impoverishes. In society, it creates and maintains ghettos that are very difficult to escape from. And in the world, the immorality of prohibition is that it effectively has created societies that have been completely corrupted, narco-democracies, societies that are having farmers who are trying to make a living being criminalised, and also obviously tens of thousands of drug-related murders between gangs that are fighting for a market that the government has created. The government created their market and maintains their cartel behaviour. How are you supposed to break into a cartel like that with the economies of scale that are required? So the irony is prohibition maintains the status of drug lords. We also have to talk to different people. We can't just talk to ourselves in this room. So if you happen to bump into a social justice warrior, you can tell them that the poor are more affected by prohibition than the wealthy. You can tell them that minorities in other countries are more affected than white people. They will laugh at it. If you bump into a social conservative, you can tell them that their tax is being squandered on sin. So there are a lot of ways that we can sell this to different people. So the main argument against dropping prohibition is, will legalization increase consumption? And this is what is often thrown back in anybody's face who wants to drop prohibition. But in the US prior to 1913, when a lot of drugs were legal, the addiction rate for opium and opiates was the same percentage as is addicted now. The same kind, groups of people will take opiates to that level of addiction. Opium in the UK was produced opium bars, opium dens, but addiction itself in those times in the 1800s was around the same percentage of heroin addicts today. So there seems to be a consistent amount, a consistent percentage of people who will take drugs to a very dangerous or addictive level. We see this in Portugal. When they decriminalised possession of all drugs for personal use, they saw an initial spike in curiosity factor. But now everything has leveled back down, and they have a lower incidence of heroin addiction than the US has. So the lesson we learned there is that dropping prohibition is not going to increase the number of people who have problem drug habits. It just means that we're going to have fewer criminals because we haven't criminalised them. So what about Ireland and the UK? Well, 37% of people in Ireland in the last 12 months have smoked marijuana. 7% use cocaine or MDMA. But there are only 4,000 heroin addicts. And there have been 4,000 or in around 4,000 heroin addicts for 25 years, not the same people. So 37% of people using marijuana don't end up being heroin addicts. And that's another lie that's been sold. So the other quirky thing was the introduction of head shops. I don't know if you have them in the north, but head shops were an interesting experiment. Because head shops effectively bypassed the drug dealer, and for a period of time, certain drugs were legal, ones that they hadn't criminalised yet. And what we saw was a massive decrease in the consumption of illegal drugs being sold by drug dealers. In other words, people were making the rational decision to go in and buy something that was legal because there was less danger involved in buying something legally rather than illegally. And exactly the same thing that happened after Prohibition in the United States with 4% beer happened. The drug baron's business was massively damaged. Head shops were burned out in the city centre in Dublin. Petrol bombs were thrown into head shops in the city centre of Dublin. They weren't thrown in by anti-drugs activists. They were thrown in by drug dealers because it was wrecking their business. So, another good thing that happened recently in the South is the introduction of injection rooms for heroin addicts. And where injection rooms have been introduced in other parts of the world, we see a massive decrease in the transmission of HIV, Hep C, decrease in overdoses, decrease in deaths overall. So this harm reduction strategy, as they call it, I think is something that is a lesson for us to sell the drop, the abolition of prohibition across all of the drugs categories. And ultimately, this is my kind of overall argument. Prohibition has failed and is failing, and has caused horrific harm to the individual, to society, and also to international and generally poorer countries. And I just think, wouldn't it be nicer to have fewer shoplifters, fewer muggings, fewer burglaries, fewer murders, fewer prisoners, and fewer prisons? And then I could set my sights on my tax cuts. So, thank you very much for listening, and I'll take any questions later. Any questions? First case.
I have to begin by admitting that I'm a chronic drug user. I drink tea. Now, there's probably some figures, but in fact, there is no reason why anyone who thinks that they can determine what's good for other people shouldn't prohibit drinking tea or coffee or anything else. And it is a drug. I know this because every length I tried to pick it up, and my family persuaded me not to because it became so unbearable with the withdrawal symptoms. But seriously, let me say this. So I mean, your principal point is correct. I also agree with you, by the way, on strategy. I think I'm a libertarian in any case and so on, but I realize that you can't get there in the morning by flicking the switch, and therefore any principled way of eliminating these ad hoc crazy restrictions and be counterproductive or be welcome. So I think you're absolutely right. The one major problem I think that, so I mean I endorse I think almost everything you said. Could I say that one argument you meet is the following somehow, and it's people make this basic confusion, which is that if something is criminalized, decriminalizing it implies approval, sanction, moral sanction in favor of it. And it's really, really hard to get into people's heads that if you say, look, I think, and for all the reasons you mentioned, well, the criminality and the dosage and the toxins and all the rest, I think that the so-called war on drugs is an abject failure. Okay, once you take it out and things settle down, then you won't have perfection, but it'll be a lot better, and you won't have all the criminality and the corruption of police forces and Libya and all the rest of it and so on. They still persist in thinking that you somehow are saying, I think taking heroin and all of these things is a really great idea. Okay. And so if I'm speaking on this, I have to begin ritually by saying, I think taking heroin is a really stupid idea. Right? I think so. But I also believe that taking alcohol is a really stupid idea. I don't drink. But hey, if in Ireland you want to introduce a strategy which minimizes social damage, you know which drug you would prohibit? It's not cocaine and it's not heroin, it's alcohol. Right? And yet, the same people who are only too happy to support the war on drugs, right? When you say to them, well, how about getting rid of alcohol? Oh, well, no, can't do that, right? So it's inconsistency, and also the idea that you're somehow approving, saying it's a really good idea, when clearly you're not. How have you made that argument? And if you have, how do you deal with it?
I think I generally draw the distinction between decriminalising and legalising. Yeah. So, as I say, as an anarchist libertarian, you're probably thinking, well, just decriminalise everything, anybody can use whatever they want, whatever. As a kind of a directional libertarian, an element more kind of a small government libertarian, I would believe in some degree of regulation. So, something like heroin, I wouldn't like to see that being sold in Tesco. So, I think, sorry. But I think if you had heroin available from your GP and you didn't have to break into Mrs. O'Brien's house to get the money for it from the pay Joxer, I think that there's an element of pragmatism there that comes into it, and the harm reduction is the important thing. But I take your point. The people who tend to make that argument are the moralists on this anyway. So you can't convince a moralist on this. It's just not possible. Their fervour or self-righteousness is too ingrained. And so what you've got to do is reach out to the silent majority, as was spoken about earlier, I think, by Bill. You've got to speak to the people whose children are smoking joints. And they're sensible middle-class people whose children are going to grow up to be sensible middle-class people. And the parents don't want to criminalise, and they're going to go, well, and that's why there's over 50% of people now favour of decriminalisation and regulation in the United States. Things move on, societies move on. But yeah, it's an argument, I understand that, but I think you just take them on at their merits. You talk about the morality of their system versus the morality of yours, the harm that their system is causing versus the harm reduction of yours. Dermot?
Just to address politics.
I can't quite hear you.
Just to address the politics of criminalization, and just a question for you. Okay, so imagine that I have a situation under which I can say to a middle class parent, if we decriminalise heroin today, 1,000 heroin addicts, the lives of 1,000 heroin addicts will be saved next week. But that will increase by 5% possibility that your little child or your little area is going to smoke a joint. What do you think the average middle class parent will say in that situation?
Well, I think if you said to them that their children had a 5% increased chance of smoking a joint, they probably wouldn't get too worried. But if you said to them they have a 5% increased chance of becoming a heroin addict, they might pause. But that's why it's really important that the numbers I mentioned, There are 37% of people in Ireland smoked marijuana last year. There are 4,000 heroin addicts. So there isn't, and all drugs are not the same. But what's happening is the social kind of education and information has moved on in the generations. If you were speaking to a middle class parent in 1950, you probably have gotten a completely different reaction to somebody in 2017, middle class parent in 2017. So they now know themselves from their own experience and from society and social culture that things of marijuana is not going to be harmful to little Johnny. And there's a very, very minimal chance, much lower than 5%, fractions of a percent, that their middle class child is going to start taking heroin. They understand that innately now. So I think from a political point of view, you can't sell that anymore. I don't think it works. I don't think prohibitionists can sell that.
Yeah, no, I think that, yeah, we can talk about it again.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about the one back as well, whenever you see something that is trying to show that addiction is a problem, are normally backed by big tobacco and alcohol corporations. And I just wanted to know what you thought about that. I think that's something that it should be always aligned with, that they are what they're marketing.
I don't know. It's not something I've ever come across or knew about. I think the argument there is that they don't want competition or something. But I think that's kind of fallacious argument. Really, the drugs are available. Probably available within 500 meters of this building. So it's not as if it's difficult to get drugs. So I think if their argument is, well, we don't want to legalize marijuana because I'm afraid that people won't buy cigarettes, I think that's wrong. I don't think that's people want to smoke marijuana. You know that. If that is their argument, I think it's bumping. I don't think it works.
What are the prospects of any here or in the UK?
I think they're pretty good for marijuana, because we tend to follow what other countries do because we're pioneering like that. And so when you see some of the US states and also European countries, Portugal's really put a hole below the hole, below the waterline for prohibitionists in Europe. Because the success of that and the fact that all their horror stories didn't come true, it's really hurt them. I think that as we become this kind of single legislative entity, it's going to be very difficult to criminalise one European citizen, in Ireland for doing something that another European citizen in Portugal is allowed to do. Okay, I'm showing my bias pro-Brexit there, but so I think that really good chance of getting marijuana legalised. It's already gone through the medicinal bit now. We're on the verge really of medicinal cannabis being legalised in the south. I think heroin is actually an easier one to sell in the south in particular. I don't know if you have methadone programs up here, but we have methadone programs in the Republic. And basically what that is kind of dropping prohibition by stealth. Instead of saying, you really like heroin, we don't think we should give you heroin because morally we object to that. So we're going to give you methadone, which is kind of like heroin, but it has a different name. So, all I'm talking about is removing an element of the euphoric value from this new drug, methadone, which makes you want to go back to Joxer and get your heroin. Pointless. So I think you could sell, and definitely politically, I think it's possible to sell the kind of regulation of heroin through the doctors, because we kind of already have that avenue. And if you just pushed kind of politicians slightly more that way, I think it could happen. So I'd be confident of those two. The rest, we're far too busy thinking about heifer prices and stuff to get into MDMA and LSD and all the rest of it. We don't really, So I think that's just going to be left to the unregulated market. Eamon.
Last one.
I agree with what you said. See, my great problem is methadone and is heroin. Right? So if you allow individuals to take drugs and walk out now and do it, why should we as the state or taxpayers fund for methadone programs? So, number one, I see it all the time in the chemist, the state is actually subsidizing these people. Second, injection rooms, again, why should the state be spending money and resources on police to supervise this? It's going to be low growth and taking drugs, you often do it in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I understand that, and again, this goes back to, if you're a purist about this, you're absolutely right. The state shouldn't be getting involved in paying for anything, and I know Tara, if she's here, would, from the Iran point of view, is going to be completely against that. But from a practical point of view, it's a saving. So if I'm paying taxes and it's costing me money to run the police, the court system, prisons, doctors, health system, all that stuff, and it'd be cheaper for me to abolish all of the costs on the criminal justice side, and to give people heroin, which really, if you make it from kind of officially and legally, costs buttons. So there's no patent on it. So if you had the state providing the heroin like they provide the methadone now, I think the harm reduction for the individual, the harm reduction for society, and also the harm reduction for my pocket would be far more. So that's kind of where my argument is. You're spending something anyway, you better spend less.